Before we begin our study today and our continuing study of the harmony of the Gospels, go to Heavenly Father in word of prayer. Let's Dale, if you would, to direct your minds to prayer.
Our most loving Heavenly Father, we thank Thee so much for this day and for the privilege we have of being able to gather together to encourage one another, to be able to study Thy Word without fear of persecution. We ask, Father, that You'd be with our sister Karen as she undergoes a procedure this morning, that it might be successful and she might be returned to her health. We ask also, Father, that You'd be with our brother John Knipp and Sharon as they continue to recover from their illnesses, and be with our sister Terry Spray, that she might recover from her surgery and not only have physical improvement but have spiritual improvement as well. We ask, Father, that You'd be with John as he directs our minds in the study this morning, that he might have a ready recollection of those things he's studied, and each one of us might open our hearts to receive the truth and nothing but the truth. These things we ask in Jesus Christ's holy name. Amen.
Amen. All right, we're going to open our Bibles, if you would, if you haven't already done so. We're in John chapter 2. John chapter 2. All right, in this particular section, we have very few harmony passages to harmonize with. And what is interesting about this, there we go, is that through John chapter 2, 3, and 4, we'll pretty much be setting in the Gospel of John. As we talked about before we started the study, the first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are called the Synoptic Gospels. And there tends to be more of an overlap and inclusion of the same stories. I mean, if you find it in one, you'll likely find it in one or the other one. It's going to run that type of pattern. However, in John's account, you'll find a good bit that's recorded that's not in the other Gospels. And it just was something, and you think about when John was written by comparison to the other Gospels. It is said that John was written towards the end of the first century. So you're talking probably, maybe based on what scholars estimate, potentially 40, 35 years after the earliest of the Gospels was written. And John's ultimate purpose for writing the Gospel of John, emphasizing the deity of Christ so that you might believe, explains why John covers some facets of Jesus' life and things that he said that maybe the other Gospel writers chose not to cover. All right, let's see. Before we begin this morning, any thoughts or comments to this? All right, let's go ahead and start our reading. And what we're going to do, we're in John chapter 2. The first section here is divided up for us in the study guide that we're using. Goes from verse 1 down through verse 12 of John chapter 2. Now, when we start here, this is typically referred to as probably the first miracle that Jesus did, at least the first one that we have recorded for us. And so, we began, where were they? Yeah, Cana there in Galilee. Yeah, they had traveled over to the region of Galilee, or they'd gone to Cana specifically here for a wedding. We're not told much about the wedding as far as who was getting married, the family relationship. The fact that Mary appears to play somewhat of a significant role suggests that maybe it might have been someone related to her, or at least someone she knew well. But we're not real certain about much of that, or any of it really. So the mother of Jesus was there, and we have Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. Okay, you see anything interesting about that? If Mary's going to be there, it makes sense Jesus would be invited. But it says his disciples were invited as well. And so it's not something we really think about very much, at least in John's wording here. It indicates Jesus and his disciples were invited. And the traditions are much as they are today when it comes to this. very seldom do you pop into a wedding uninvited. For our time period, you got to factor the cost, the room, and if they're going to provide food, and how many people are coming, and so forth like that. But here, in the case in point, we see Jesus' disciples were invited to this. Now, what was the trouble they ran into there in verse 3?
No wine.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like they had punch and water and Diet Coke and, got a big old ice chest, take your drink, it's pretty much, this was the primary consumption regarding the liquid that they would have had at the time. And the wine that would have been delivered, we'll find out a little bit later, would have been delivered in various vats. We received a comment last week on the video, and this was right at the tail end of the class when I was mentioning what we'll be talking about next week. And the person suggested that that the wine vats would have had to have been blessed or issued as being holy, coming from Jerusalem, the temple. And this is what makes it so significant that Jesus turned the water into wine. I couldn't find any evidence of that whatsoever. It was an interesting comment, and so I consulted with a couple of preacher friends of mine to see if they'd ever heard that, and they hadn't heard anything like that. And it would suggest that maybe the wine was produced in the temple, and it wasn't. So it was an interesting thought. I appreciate the comment there, but couldn't find the scriptural support. This is just regular wine. People talk about whether it was alcoholic or non-alcoholic. I think we could debate that all day, and I can tell you why I think it wasn't. But there's nothing in the text that says, okay, the Greek word translated here means what type. And I think we begin to argue over that, we lose the point. Okay. The point was the primary thing that they were drinking at this wedding, the wine, ran out. Okay. The wine ran out. And so Jesus says to the woman, he says to her, actually, they come to her, and they say they have no wine. And so the mother of Jesus tells him this, and so what is his response?
I was happy doing something.
Yeah. Why are you telling me this?
We have more important things.
Yeah, well, he's not the party planner. He has nothing to do with the wedding as far as we know. There's no reason why she should go to him except for one reason. Yeah, she had to have known. Is it possible that she knew that he was very resourceful and she could say, hey, son, we're out of wine, and he said, oh, I know a few people. More than likely, she knew that he could do something about it, as he did. And he said, woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. And it could be, too, she was just complaining to him, But either way, she comes to him, she expresses him the problem, and he says, it doesn't have anything to do with me, my hour has not yet come. But he doesn't stop, though. He says, whatever she says, whatever he says to you, do it. Now, what does that say about the relationship between Jesus and his mother?
Respect.
He still respected her. And she knew enough about him to say, all right, whatever he says do, you do it. He doesn't say, sure, I'll solve the problem, I'll fix the problem. This is simply her statement to the people, whatever he says do it. And so we have 6 water pots of stone. They were according to the manner of purification of the Jews. And this might be the connecting aspect with the comment that we received there.
I didn't understand the comment. I don't know if I wasn't listening close enough. What was the point of that comment? I didn't catch it at all.
Let me see if I can locate
it didn't mean anything to me to be able to understand what your point was.
Well, right, okay. What was the point? That's a good point. Hang on just a second. Let me find that here real quick. Mainly just to share the fact that we had someone, we don't often get comments on our study as far as this type of study. So when someone does take the opportunity to share their thoughts on something, I think it is important at times, just like we would take comments here in class to try to bring them in as well to the study. And there it is. Let's see. Sorry, if I got it. All right. So what we're looking at here, going back to last week. I know the suspense is killing you. All right, let's see if this is where I found it at. Here we go. All right, come on, hurry up. Well, that's going to take a minute. Anyway, the point is that what's significant about it is that normally this person was saying that the jars had to be holy. They had to be specially treated at the temple in order to be used. You know, and therefore the application was to the wine. Yeah.
That doesn't compute with me. I don't know what they're talking about.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to, for whatever reason, it's taken a while to get everything loaded up. So, wait a minute.
I have just a reference that I looked at that says Jewish law requires that the water used for ritual washing, so that appears to be what that was,
Okay.
to be naturally pure, unused, not contain other substances, and not be discolored.
So, in other words, these were the 6 water pots that were there.
Yeah, and the water had to be poured out of the vessel as a human act and not stick your hands in it.
In order to use the water. Okay.
Well, that makes sense.
And so he comes to these 6 water pots that had been prepared for the proper cleansing. And this is what he terms, well, here it says fill the water pots with water. Suggests they'd already been used. And so they're filled with water. But the water is not purified, you know, as the Jewish law was. They're just now empty pots filled with water. And that may be the connecting that the individual and made with that. And I'm sorry, I'm not expressing that as clearly as they did, but it wasn't really supported by this either. You know, the point was that the water pots had been purified, the water had been purified, but not the water he's putting in there. You know, from what we understand, he said fill it up with water. So they went over to the local tap, turned the tap on, and filled it up. Now, probably to the local well, wherever they would have the water at. All right, so let's continue there. If that ever loads up, then I'll come over and share it with you. But it's not going to do it right now. So anyway, so he says, fill the water pots with water, and they did this up to the brim. Now he tells them to go and draw some out. What did they find? He says, take it to the master of the feast.
Very, very good quality.
Yeah, exactly. There's a very high quality there in regards to what normally would have been used at this point. And this is what the master observes there when you come over here to verse 9. He says, now when the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine and did not know where it came from, the servants knew, but he did not. The master called the bridegroom. And what was the biggest surprise that he had? Based at this point, the wine that they were serving should have been, not the best. Start off with the best, and then and best could mean anything. I'm not real certain if they're talking about the difference between non-fermented, and then when that's all gone, then you go to one that's kind of gone a little bit vinegary, sour and so forth. That may be what they're talking about. But either way, what's brought to them is good wine. Now, there is a book that was written in the late 1800s called Bible Wines. And the fellow talks about, from his position, why he thinks that, like, the good wine here would not have had any alcohol in it. All right. His argument is that when you see wine, you see must, you see grape juice. It could be grape juice, or it could be the fermented stuff. And his position was the good wine, they would have tasted very sweet, because it would have been juice. And that's what they would have preferred. Not the sour stuff. Remember when they brought Jesus, they brought him vinegar? That was essentially soured wine. Okay? And it had people drink it. It's kind of like the cheaper stuff. Talk about people buying cheap stuff today versus the quote-unquote expensive stuff. So his point was that it's very likely, like in this case in point, what they brought to the master was grape juice. That which was starting out at the start. Did you find the comment? I can't see. If you can read it.
It's a long.
Well, okay, I'll pick out just the primary point of it. Was it on Facebook or?
It was.
I was in the wrong spot. All right, talking about the pots. This is what we're just talking about. Jesus reveals his divinity here by his command. No one could add water to these pots after they were filled at the temple, or they would be struck dead. That's the missing command I could not find, or they would be struck dead. Not only did he command it, but the water then turned to wine. So, their viewpoint, the first miracle was the command being obeyed and no one dying. Then the second miracle was wine. That's the point I was trying to, that I think I was not wording well. They were saying that when they refilled the pots, they should have died. But I never found anywhere in the Old Testament text that would have stated that. Okay. So, when that being the case, this is why this one author I was telling you about suspects that the good wine was sweet to the taste, more natural, less fermented. Whereas the other stuff should have already been souring, the cheaper stuff. So we weren't there, we don't know, we can't go back in time. And really there's not a lot there are some old resources, but not enough to say, if you drink good wine, you don't get drunk. If you drink old wine, you get drunk. There were wines, there were alcohol drinks that would cause you to get drunk. Others, wines that didn't have that effect. And so, difference between fermented and non-fermented and how far and so forth. So anyway, this was a shock. You kept the good wine until now. So, verse 11 now. We'll stop here in just a moment. He says here in verse 11 that what does this begin?
Just for signs is what it says. I don't know what you're asking.
No, that's it. The beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee. This was the start of it. At least there in Cana of Galilee. Manifest his glory, and his disciples what? They believed in him. Okay? And the last one in this section here that we're looking at, he says after this he went down to Capernaum, he, his mother, and his brothers, and his disciples. And it says here they did not stay there many days. Capernaum, we'll talk about that a little bit later in regards to the life of Jesus. So, all right, any thoughts or any comments about this? All right, let's go ahead and take a minute and look at some of the questions here. All right, so beginning there in verse 1. Yeah, what kind of wine did Jesus make? And the author says, for instance, intoxicating or other, and give proof.
I couldn't.
Here's what he's looking for. Okay, here his answer is, and this is the general argument, Jesus would not have made anything that would have caused someone to sin by gotten drunk. Therefore, based on that, the wine that he made had to have been non-alcoholic because he would not have made any alcohol because, that's just as wrong could be. And so he didn't do that. And the thing is, there's nothing in the text, okay? Clearly, I agree with one point of that. Jesus isn't going to do anything that if they drink of it, it would put them in a state of inebriation that would put them in violation of the law. I agree with that. But that in and of itself is not really stated in the text. It's an assumption.
So he made the wine from water.
Made the wine from water.
He could do anything, though.
Yeah.
He could have made it out of midair.
Well, but here's the thing. I mean, if he could take water and what he does by turning it into wine, to grape juice, is he adds whatever the properties of grape juice is. I mean, you think about the grape juice you buy today or squeeze a grape, that water became that. So the assumption, and I think it's a reasonable assumption, he's going to turn it into grape juice, not a year-old grape juice or 3-year-old grape juice or however that all process worked. Probably made it straight to what wine began as, the fruit of the grapes. Yeah. So I can, that's his reasoning behind the question.
That's good reasoning.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I stumbled around about this one because I've always held the same position you have, but I tried to look at it from the other, since he put the word intoxicating there, I tried to see, well, why do people feel so strongly that it probably was? I mean, there's a lot of people do, and a lot don't. Most Christians don't believe it. So I looked at some commentaries, and this commentary compared it to when in the very beginning, when God created the tree of good and evil, and you weren't to touch it or anything like that. So they compared it to that this is a new era now. Jesus is now starting the Christian era. It's not the Jewish back that they had the tree. Of course, it didn't last long, but we don't know. Anyway, they compared it, and I thought, it's possible. But I never could get anywhere with it. I am still as stumped on it as ever, but I do lean toward it's not intoxicating. But I did entertain the thought, well, it could be like the tree, you just leave it alone.
Well, here's what's happening. You've got people who live now in our culture, in our generation, in this time period for the last 200 years. You can go to this restaurant, go to the supermarket, you have sodas, you have juices, you have milk, you've got instant Kool-Aid, you got all a sundry of things that you could drink. Then you go to the alcoholic department, you got the different levels of beers, you got different levels of wine, and then you got the hard stuff and all that other stuff. And so Christians say, because of what the Bible teaches, we live in an age where we have plenty of opportunity of what we can drink. There's no need to drink wine. So the conclusion is drinking wine is wrong. All right? So then the people who want to drink wine, okay, living in this culture and everything, then they try to seek to prove why they can't, why it's not wrong. And they jump on this. The problem is, at this time period was nothing like what we live in today. The water they drank was from well, goat's milk, and then goat cheese. But that was it. They had very limited, juices of whatever they had access to. So they had very limited things to drink. So I wouldn't imagine someone in the 2nd century looking, hey, he made water into wine. I can drink wine now. It was probably a part of their regular consumption. I'd heard, it's been told to me years ago, and I'd have to look at it to prove, supposedly the Jews would cut the wine. Like 1 part wine, 7 parts water, or, something like that. That very seldom did they ever drink it in the fullest strength, unless it was the grape juice there. And, but the problem is you got someone today trying to justify wine, and they go to this, and everything's changed. So to me, the only thing to look at that is whatever they were drinking, Jesus made more of it. And it wouldn't have been a violation of the law with whatever they were consuming.
We know that there was a lot of people in the Old Testament got drunk. And starting with Noah, he stands out to me pretty good. So I don't know. I'm straddling the fence. I'm not condemning of people with this as to what they believe. So I'm going to float around with it.
If all alcoholic drinks were fermented the same way they did it back then,
be different.
I think the discussion would be different.
It would,
because the alcoholic drinks today are a lot stronger. I know they had strong drinks and you get drunk back then, but the way it's done today, I was talking with Jeremiah. He was sharing with me a story of a family that a group of people had gone out to a restaurant, and some of them drank like a beer, but there was one person that didn't, and he was the driver. So the culture we live in, where if a group of people are going to go out and they may drink some, there'll always be that designated driver. And it's because of the type of alcohol and the levels of alcohol that we have today.
We know in verse 10, I think it's 10, it talks about the good wine. I think it's a difference there, because I think the good wine is probably the wine that was strong, and that's why they were all drunk. Probably the other.
Well, it's possible, but it doesn't say they were drunk, though.
Well, it says.
Or does it?
They were well drunk, it says.
That's like drank.
In verse 10. So I think
when
when they ran out of the good wine, which was the fermented wine or whatever, then they had the other, which was that he made maybe that wasn't.
That's a good point. I suspect that when it says well drunk, it means when they have consumed a lot of it.
Oh, I I just figured that, we talked about the good, you say the good wine, I figured that's probably the powerful.
Well, when you bring the good stuff out, they're too inebriated to know what's good.
What they call good.
I would,
I don't know.
That would work.
that's an interesting point, but let's see. Let me do a cross reference here. I hear, and when it says everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely,
That's what I
then the poor wine. And then, that's not the one I wanted. Drunk freely is the same there, but what about the New
Well, it's a
American
good wine
Standard?
in the first, and then he had made more and was more like,
I think what he's saying here is, well, the New American Standard Version has as a footnote, or have become drunk. Well,
It'll get so confusing if you really.
yeah,
get
we
into
better
this.
not go down that rabbit hole. Because then it would suggest that the new wine, that the good wine would have caused inebriation. But I don't think so. I mean, I think they just drunk enough that why waste the good stuff? And let's say you're right about the inebriation part. Why would you bring back the good unfermented stuff? You know, if that's what the good wine was. People can't tell the difference anyway now. Maybe. That's a good point. I missed that one altogether.
I always kind of thought it was, when they're drunk, then they can't tell what it tastes like. But
So
you
he
can
just
see
made
it
it
the
up.
other way, where when people haven't been drinking anything, that their taste buds are sharp, and especially with wine. It seems like if you go to wine tastings, it's very much about your taste buds. They rinse their mouth out, or they eat something to try and take the taste off. If they've been drinking something, it kind of blunts down what they're going to taste next. So when they've already kind of coated their tongues, then you don't worry about how good something else tastes. And wine seems to be about taste.
Yeah.
It's not about how drunk and how blasted I can get. It's got certain flavors and smells and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'll own up when being.
I hear.
We're gonna have to ask the Lord when we get there.
Yeah, I'll own up when I'm wrong about something. And Miss Sister Decker, you look up the word that's translated as well drunk. It means to be drunk.
Really drunk. Sure argues
I
about.
think they were already drunk in the beginning, and then when they ran out of it, then he
Oh.
just made some more weaker.
Tell you what, we'll go with that.
Why don't they use the word juice instead of wine? I mean, that is so confusing.
So
Okay.
that's another thing I was thinking of.
Yeah,
Don't they say later on, Timothy didn't want to drink, but he was told to take wine
Yeah,
for his stomach.
so-
So it's medicinal, and I've heard an argument that could be completely specious, but used to be maybe parts of Europe, the water quality is iffy, and alcohol can kill stuff. So they might be drinking weak beer, or just because you don't trust the water very much.
Well, I have heard too overseas that wine at the dinner table is a bit more common than it is here. I mean, they still frown upon inebriation and public drunkenness and everything. But, well,
And it also says that, and when the guests were well drunk, then they gave them the inferior.
yeah. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you. I mean, I can tell you we can look at what scholars think, and the suggestion is, and even his question here, again, I don't think could be proven by the text, other than what Jesus is making would not, I can't see him doing something that would create a sinful state within the people that were present.
Well, if they handle it right, it's not sinful. It'd be just like drinking juice. If you do not get inebriated, then there's no
Yeah.
harm.
So I don't,
We don't do anything in excess, and that's Jesus' teaching.
well,
It's interesting when you define it from the ESV, it says the past tense of to drink. So the ESV, when you click on define it,
Mhm.
it'll say when they have past tense of to drink. So when they have drunk something. But when you look on it from there, it said to be drunk.
well, see, that's the oddity of that, because the New American Standard Version is supposed to use the same, I've got the wrong word in my brain. Hang on just a second. Westcott and Hort's Greek text. Same Greek text as the ESV and the Holman Christian Standard Bible. But for some reason, the NASB, New American Standard Bible, chooses to translate it as, or as a footnote, or be drunk. So it would suggest that in the Westcott and Hort Greek text, if it's a different Greek word, it would ask why did the New American Standard Bible, who tried to follow that as well, went with an older word from the Erasmus's Greek text that we'll get the King James and the New King James translation from. So, oh no, it's good. I'll have to research that a little more. I didn't expect this discussion today. Yes, ma'am.
My last comment.
Okay.
Regardless of which it is, the point is they bring out the good stuff, whatever the good stuff is,
Yeah.
when people are discriminating and very fresh and ready to judge in the beginning, and then either their taste buds dull or they're drunk, intoxicated. They're not as discriminating later. That's the whole point. It doesn't matter which way it was.
That's right. And whatever Jesus made was tasted like the good, what they had at the start. Yeah.
That we can figure out.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
the only thing.
Whatever it was.
Okay. Yeah, let's give you something else to ponder on today. But either way, I don't believe this particular instance can be used one way or the other to support or tear down an argument either way. We have Jesus fulfilling a need that was there, and what was made was considered good. You know, and he would not have done, we strong perception, he would have not have created a situation that would have put them into a sinful state against God.
That's
Hence
where
the drunkenness.
that's where this other commentator gives the truth.
Okay. All right. Well, let's see. I think we have emptied that discussion. Okay. Let's look at number 2. What reasons are given for this miracle in verse 11? To manifest his glory. And another result of it was his disciples believed. Who are Jesus' traveling companions in verse 12? His disciples. Yeah.
His mother and his brothers.
Yeah, his mother and his brothers. That's right. That's a good point. All right. So let's go ahead and continue with this. His mother, his brothers, disciples, but they did not stay there many days in Capernaum. All right. So the next section here the author has us going to is going to pick us up there in verse 13. Any other final thoughts or comments before we continue? All right. Let me make sure we've haven't overlooked something here. And I have not. I'm sure I've overlooked a lot of things, but no comments. So we start in verse 13. Let's walk this through down to verse 25 there. What Jewish celebration was at hand? Sorry, I forgot to silence this. It was the Passover. Okay. And when we begin the section where the Passover was at hand, Jesus goes up to Jerusalem. And when he goes to Jerusalem, he goes into the temple. And what does he find in the temple there in verse 14? You got people selling stuff. And it makes perfect sense. You know, why travel with a bunch of livestock to Jerusalem once a year? You got to travel 100 miles. Just buy it when you get there. You know, we'll have stalls set up. We'll sell sheep. We'll sell goat. We'll sell oxen. Or we'll sell doves. And you know, if you don't have the right currency to buy it with, we'll change your money for you for a small nominal fee. You know, makes perfect sense. You know, make a little bit of money on the side, provide for the worshiper, make their travels easier. That's what people try to do today. You know, it's just, it makes sense from a very human standpoint. All right, but it also shows that they clearly misunderstood. You know, even the point of sacrifices. The point of sacrifices wasn't, you know, I'll buy a sheep when I get there and then we'll go kill it and then come back home again. It's about taking your own. It's about going to the trouble. It's the whole process of traveling to Jerusalem for the Passover. And so, verse 15 there, Jesus made a whip of cords. You know, listen, if we're going to use the water to wine as a justification for drinking alcohol on a regular basis. Well, this is a justification for making a whip and just start whipping people. You know, you got to consider the context. You got to consider what's the purpose and who it was and so forth before we start making a broad-based application. So, what did he do with this whip, of course?
Drove them out.
Can you imagine the scene? Because we're not in Herod's temple. This was no small temple. Now, they were probably confined to an area of the temple. Okay? But here he comes with a whip of cords. He drives them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen and poured out the money changers, or the changers' money, and overturned the tables. Now, this in a small way, would you say, is in a small, minute way, a manifestation of the wrath of God? I mean, because Jesus is rightfully angry. Look what he says here. He says, take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise. And that's what they had done. They had turned what's supposed to be a place of worship, a house of worship, into a place to make money, you know. Any thoughts so far? All right, so we come through here. Then his disciples remembered that it was written, zeal for your house has eaten me up. All right, notice that statement there for a moment. Zeal for your house has eaten me up. You have a footnote in your Bibles that probably points to the Psalm 69, verse 9. And herein we have the psalmist here saying the same thing, because zeal for your house has eaten me up, and the reproaches of those who reproach you have fallen on me. And we'll take time to kind of look at that. At the start of the psalm begins with, save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in deep, and so forth. So we see that imagery there. Zeal. Now, this may not mean that the apostles were making a prophetic connection. Maybe this is a verse they remembered. He loved the house, his Father's house. He loved the temple so much that he was consumed by that. You know, if they knew their psalms, the disciples might have called this up. So anyway, so the Jews answered and said to him, what sign do you show to us since you do these things? Okay, you come in and you have driven everybody out of the temple, or all the money changers. You've made this huge commotion. Show us a sign that shows us you have the authority to do these things. And so he gives them a sign, or tells them about a sign that would come. He says, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Now, what do you think they naturally want to think about?
The building.
Exactly.
Physical building, temple.
Yeah, there are different viewpoints, and I think it has to do with translations, if I remember correctly, on verse 20. They reply to him, it has taken 46 years to build the temple, and when you raise it up in 3 days. I think there are some scholars that suggest that it might not have taken that long. There might have been an issue there with the translation. But the footnote, or the note I've got, is that this is Herod's temple, and this is what it's referencing. And it lasted from 2019 BC to, let's see. All right, some scholars favor an alternate translation. This temple was built 46 years ago, which would date the statement around 2930, since there was no years. In other words, instead of them saying that it took 46 years to build it, some scholars say that what they're saying is they built it 46 years ago. And then that would put, based on when it was built, this would put Jesus' statement about the time that he made it. But in either case, though, here's the point is, either it took 46 years to build it, or this thing has stood for 46 years. And you will raise it up in 3 days. But he says to them in verse 21 that he was speaking of the temple of his what? The body, that's right. And remember, this is John. John writing this many years later, so that we might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And so he's bringing this and highlighting this point. Therefore, when he had risen from the dead, his disciples remembered. Think about that. They remembered this point, the promise that he made, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had said. Okay. And we're not saying remembered at 98 or 98 AD. We're talking about after he died and arose from the grave. Probably sitting around and they said, well, he said in 3 days, he would build it back up. So, all right. Any thoughts or comments about this section? All right. Let's go a little farther here. Then verse 23. Now, when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover during the feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs which he did. Jesus, of course, did not commit himself to them because he knew all men and had no need that anyone should testify of man, for he knew what was in man. So think about what he's saying here. He was in Jerusalem at the Passover during the feast. Many people believed in his name, okay? But at this point, he doesn't commit himself to them. What does he mean by that? Probably didn't let them follow him, or didn't create a following, or didn't say, I'm going to stay here and lead you. Maybe somewhere along those lines. And the reason is, he knew how fickle the hearts of men were. And he didn't need, and this is what the text is saying, he didn't need anyone to come and say, Jesus, let me tell you about man. You need to be careful with dealing with him. Because he knew man. He knew what was in man. Interestingly enough, whether or not this makes a direct connection or not, in John chapter 6, towards the end of it, just a couple of chapters later, 4 chapters later, we have people who cannot handle the teachings of Jesus. And they depart from him. So that may be a small indication of the very thing he was talking about. Matter of fact, even his apostles fled. So I mean, it's, this could be just a general statement kind of looking ahead about those things. All right. Let's look at the questions now. First one is a doozy, right up there with the number 1 of the previous section. That's not as challenging. Is this the same account of cleansing the temple as found in Matthew 21, Mark 11, and Luke 19? All right. Why would you say it's not?
This appears to be earlier in his ministry.
Okay. Based on where John records it. Okay.
Well, yeah, based on where John records it, but also because he wasn't ready to commit at this one, and I think by then he already had a following.
Okay, that's a good point, especially when you take into account Matthew's placement of this. Let's start over Matthew chapter 21 for just a moment. Matthew chapter 21 begins here with the triumphal entry of Jesus there into the city of Jerusalem. So clearly, Matthew is going to start out there the last week of his life, basically. All right, and so we come to this point, and he's entered into Jerusalem. Then Jesus went into the temple of God, drove out all those who bought and sold in the temple, overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. Then he said, it is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves. Then the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. Now, when the leaders saw this and what everybody was saying about him, they said to him, do you hear what these are saying? And so what is interesting about this is what the argument that it is 2 different events is a lot that surrounds it. Remember, they said, what sign are you going to do to support this? And the only sign he says will be destroy the temple and raise up in 3 days. Now, and therefore, the conversation is different surrounding this. He actually does miracles and so forth. That's the argument, one of the arguments for 2 different events. But I've heard it argued, though, that it's the same event, that John just happens to place it earlier on in his writing. And if you laid it out right, the only sign that he would perform for them, and it would be just a week away, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll build it up. And remember, when they bring him up on trial, what's one of the things they said that he said, I'm going to destroy the temple. So either it was 3 years recollection of a statement, or a statement that was made just a week earlier. You know, so it could be either way. It could be the same event. If it is, it means John put it in a different placement, but for a very specific purpose, and emphasized something very specific about it. So it's basically two different viewpoints on that.
Well, and I also just think that just because he drove out the money changers in the beginning, or if it was two different events, just because he drove them out there does not mean they stayed out
Oh, you're right about that.
until the next day, let alone the next year.
Could be bookends, both establishing his authority at the beginning and at the end. You know, that's a strong argument for being two different instances. Yeah. But I do believe, though, that if it was the same instance, Matthew and Luke's placement is more accurate, you know, based on the testimony. But if it's too different, then there's a good reason for that as well. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Any comments on that? All right, so the next question then, what application can we make of John chapter 2, verse 16? And he said, to those who sold doves, take these things away, do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise. What are some applications of that we might make? And keep in mind, this is the author wanting you to think a little bit about this. He's not going to be nice enough and tell us his application he's looking for.
I think the temple is, one of the applications is that the temple was for worship, and they should have been focused on worship. And the other thing was that you ought to be prepared by the time you get there. You shouldn't be preparing after you get ready to worship.
All right, those are two good lessons. You know, the temple's purpose was for worship. You know, the temple, there was money in the temple. People would donate the money. But the temple worship wasn't designed to sell things to earn money. And that wasn't the point. And the second thing you said there, I think is very true. The idea there that they needed to be prepared. Yeah. What else?
Well, the fact that they were charging extra money for selling these animals, it made it a place of merchandise. Mm-hmm. I mean, they were literally doing business that just infuriated the Lord. That it's a place of worship.
Yeah.
It's not a business at all.
You don't do these bake sales and stuff.
That's right.
Don't use it for that.
Well, see, that's okay. And I wondered if that's where the author was going to a little bit into that aspect. The thing about it, the temple was the house of the Lord for all intents and purposes. The Lord's presence was there, at least when the Ark of the Covenant was there. You know, we know for certain. And it was a place of worship, and even Jesus calls it, you know, my Father's house and everything. Very physical location. But yet later he will come and say that a time will come when you will not worship me in Jerusalem or on the mountain. All right? But whoever worships the Father, worship him in spirit and in truth. In John chapter 4 there. So some brethren will look at this, and I've got to be very careful how. Let me stop the stream. No, I'm kidding. Some brethren will use this in a way that I don't think that at least textually it supports it. I think there's other reasons. They'll use this and say, well, the church where we meet should not be used for merchandise. You know, should only be used for worship service because the temple was, and so the building, same thing. Problem is the building is not holy. It's not like the temple was. The building could be torn down and our prayers will still be heard by God. We could meet out right out front there. You know, we got plenty of space in this ground so we could easily do that. But what we have to look at, though, what is the purpose of the church? Under the New Covenant time period, the church is the temple of God. Okay, you think about that. The 1 Corinthians chapter 3 makes kind of a statement like that. And so if the body of Christ is not intended for merchandise, if it's all about serving one another, mostly serving God, we understand that, it's revolving around that, then it asks the question, what is the purpose of the local church? When we talk about the purpose of the local church, his same spiritual purpose. So whatever the local church does needs to follow in the pattern given to it by Scripture. Therefore, when local churches begin to go into the field of entertainment, making money, and things like that, then the local church leaves the purpose of the church. And so there is, I don't mind the connection as long as we recognize the temple of God was physical. So what is the temple of God today? Well, it's the church. What was the purpose? What's the purpose? And then we can come down to the local level and say, okay, because of this is our purpose, there are things that we should not be doing. I don't know if that's where the author was going with that, but
we have known people who made a commitment to attend someplace because of it would better their business.
yeah.
And that's not what being a member of any congregation is about.
I knew a fellow, we lived in McAllister. He ran an old print shop. I mean, old print shop. He had old equipment there, you know. And it was interesting watching his paper. His paper folder didn't work. It was longer than this room, you know. And the offset press worked off suction, and just watching this huge machine run. But anyway, he was complaining one day a little bit, talking about churches, and he attended denomination. And there was one denomination in town. He was saying, yeah, I don't go there because everybody that goes there, they're only going there for business because of the connections. You know, it's a large church too, you know. And so if they want to establish a business connection, they'll go there. If they want to increase their sales, they'll go there to find people and everything, you know. And that's in the denomination. It's sad to think that it might be done within the body of Christ itself, or not body of Christ, within the local congregations. And a lot has to do with the reason. A fellow told me years ago, and interestingly enough, he was a member of Church of Christ that used instrumental music. So I couldn't quite figure how he did not see the very thing he was telling me. But he said that the rule of thumb is whatever you use to bring them in, you have to keep providing for them, or else they'll go. You know, and that's true. You bring them in through social invitation, through things like that, then you got to keep giving it to them, or else they'll find another place that gives better. But if what you offer is teaching the Word of God, well, that'll always be there, you know. And so then it gets into motives, and so it's a lot of interesting. Any other thoughts or comments? Okay. Well, we're at the top of the hour. Wow, it's already 12 o'clock. Got to reset that clock. It does. Well, you start dealing with wine and, you know, work in the church, it takes. Yeah. Let's see. We'll plan to continue this, of course, next week. We'll pick up with the third question. There's not too much more. And then they're a little bit simpler there that the author asks. Then we'll move into John chapter 3. All right. Any thoughts or comments? And hopefully the views expressed in the class today represent that of the local congregation here. So I appreciate all the participation, and let's go ahead and be dismissed in the word of prayer. Our dear Lord, most righteous and almighty Heavenly Father, we thank you for the time that you've given us and for the day in which we live and are able to serve you. Heavenly Father, we ask that you'll watch over those who are fighting various illnesses, as Brother Dale mentioned earlier. Pray that you'll continue to watch over them and be with them. We ask Son to watch over us as we go through this day, and please be with us, dear Lord, in our lives as we strive to serve you. These things we pray in your Son's most holy name. Amen.